Welcome to this episode of the Business of Practice podcast, where we focus on the physical, financial, and human sides of equine veterinary medicine. In this episode, we're talking about staff communication with Dr. Mike Pownall. I'm your host, Kim Brown, publisher of Equimanagement. The Business of Practice podcast is brought to you in 2022 by CareCredit. Mike Pownall, DVM MBA, is a partner in McKee Pownall Equine Services in Canada and a partner in Oculus Insights. That company is focused on helping veterinarians and other members of the animal healthcare industry improve their businesses. Thank you, Dr. Pownall, for joining us today to talk about staff communication.
Hi, Kim. Glad to be here. As always, always enjoy our conversations.
Well, I'm really looking forward to this one because we all know it's been so hard to find and keep associate veterinarians, vet techs, office staff in the industry for a while. And of course, it's been even worse since the pandemic started. But how does having good communication skills with our staff help us, our business, our clients, and the staff themselves? And let's start by defining what is employee engagement.
At Oculus, we do an employee engagement survey, and we've done them, dozens and dozens of them all across the world, actually. And employee engagement is basically they do what's best for the company because they want to. It's not like, when they leave work, they're thinking about things. They care about the people they work with. They want the business to be successful. And it's not because, they're getting paid a lot or you're telling them to. They just do it because they're engaged. I mean, the definition is really, in this aspect, is really part of the title. They go on above. They go above and beyond because they want to, because they care about the company, the success of the company, and their coworkers.
And tell us a little bit, you mentioned these surveys. Let's talk a little bit about what you have found.
These are fantastic surveys. When I finished my MBA, some of my reading shifted from veterinary journals to business journals. And I was reading MIT Sloan has a great business journal from the School of Business at MIT, and they talked about employee engagement surveys. And in this case, they talked about a survey that they did globally of big multinational corporations. And I looked at it and I went, boy, that's something that can be done in a vet practice. So I'm always, my practice, McKee Pownall Equine Services, is always the guinea pig for my ideas, good or bad. And so in 2016, we initiated the first employee engagement survey at my practice, and it was eye-opening. And, so basically one of the things it taught me was that our vets are getting burnt out. They're just running too hard. And because of that, that's when we as a business switched to a 4-day work week, and it was transformative for our company. But, even though our capacity was down 20% because we were working one less day a week, and it wasn't meaning that everybody's working extra hours the other 4 days, they worked the regular hours, but having 20% less capacity, we had a 13% increase in revenue.
Wow.
And basically, it was just our vets just felt more motivated. They weren't as stressed. Many of them came to me later and just said, I've rediscovered my joy of veterinary medicine. My 5th day, I don't really take it as a day off, but I'm reading journals. I'm catching up on client communication. I just feel better about things. And I've had a couple of the vets that work with us are, they're moms. And they're like, I'd always be feeling so stressed, and I got to get my notes done, and I got to get all my client, everything I had to get done at night. I put my kids to bed, and then I knew I had hours of paperwork afterwards. But all of a sudden I realized that on my day off, I can catch up. So It worked out really well. But one of the things we discovered in it, and I can tell you in every single survey we have done since, the area where everybody does not as well as expected, let me put it that way, because it's a range, is in how they communicate, and it's communication within the organization. And I think we all think that we communicate well, but we don't. And I think that's probably human nature. How many things fall apart because we're not great communicators. So so what we've identified of what the problem with when we have poor communication is more medical errors. There's tension in the workplace because people are uncertain what's going on. And that leads to poor staff morale. So really the the first area we recommend people to work on to address when they say their morale's poor, people don't seem engaged, is let's look at the communication. Because, basically a lack of communication from management to staff is directly correlated to decreased levels of trust between management and owners to the staff. When there's communication lapses, people start to make their own stories. They try to figure things out on their own. And so when there's that, then they get a lack of consistency of protocol and of medical care, and, people make up their own stories or truths that become entrenched in the culture. And one of the things that really surprises us when we see this more and more, poor partner to partner or partner to management communication is obvious to staff. And it really sets the tone for the rest of the staff. It's kind of like when I was much younger, when my parents got separated, and they were surprised that I wasn't surprised. And it was like, they've been like, they're trying to hide things. And, but all I know is there was a lot of tense conversations, a lot of whispering, a lot of hush hush, and they thought they were hiding it. And I knew. And I think it's the same thing with businesses. It's like when the owners don't get along or they're annoyed at something and they're not aligned, everybody knows about it.
And how does that translate down, do you think, when there's friction between the owners or the management and the top vets? How do you think that communicates down to the rest of the staff? You said you feel the friction, but what does that mean?
Well, then everybody's wondering what's going on. And so is the business okay? Are things happy? Is somebody leaving? That's why I say everybody makes up their own story. And every situation is unique. And so so it's sort of like if, there's these partners have been together and they've been squabbling for years, then people start thinking like parents, like, are they going to finally break up? Is one partner going to leave? And it gives a sense of insecurity. And then people don't feel like they have any agency in what's going on. And then they're just wondering. And then that's morale's tense. What's going to happen?
Yeah. Well, let's flop it around then. So what, Dr. Pownall, would be some of your recommendations to have better employee engagement, which then, as you've said, translates to better practice success?
Well, I think what they need to do is, you recognize that communication is essential. And it's all, it's a challenge because sometimes, what we see is there's poor communication or sometimes there's too much communication. Yeah. And it's better to have too much communication. And so one of the things that we recommend to practice owners, managers, is find out the way people want to be communicated with. And there are a couple ways of it. So, some people will send out, a newsletter. We found out after a while is most people didn't read the newsletter.
Yeah.
Because if you're using any one of the newsletters, the online newsletter things, they can tell you the open rates, the click rates. And then we'd spend time crafting these informative newsletters and find that like 40% of the staff opened them. That meant 60% of them had no idea. And so what we found in our organization is having little quick weekly huddles, 5-10 minutes. Here's what's going on. Here is who's off. Here's what equipment is off. Here's who's starting. I mean, anything that you need to know, and everybody is there right in front of you. And then, people can talk about it. Some of the more lighthearted communication, we have a private Facebook group for our staff. So that's where we celebrate birthdays or work anniversaries or what have you. And so, that's what happens. So face-to-face meetings, we also use a lot of Slack, which is sort of like a messaging system. It's like text messaging, but you can make specific groups. You can, it has a great memory, so you can, remember they were talking about something 2 weeks ago. Well, you can search for it and find it. And we find Slack is a great way to keep people up to date in the moment things. Like if there's an emergency, we may say, hey, we got to call the veterinarian or what have you. But it's a great way for us to communicate that way. The other thing, too, for communication is recognizing that your culture needs this open, transparent method of communicating. And so, a lot of people say they have an open door policy. But until somebody actually goes in that open door and they talk about a challenge and everybody gives them lip service and then ignores it, and then, well, then that open door really means nothing. So if you want to have an open door policy, you've got to commit to it. And the other thing and this is huge, Kim, this is probably one of the bigger things, is we are so focused on correcting people. So especially as veterinarians, we because we can't make mistakes. We try not to make mistakes. Like when we make mistakes, bad things happen. And so we look at everything else with those same lenses. And so we're constantly nitpicking at people like, oh, you did this wrong, you did that wrong, or my truck wasn't packed properly, or boy, the x-ray plate wasn't charged enough. And all people hear is negativity. And what we should be flipping it is spending more opportunity talking about positive feedback. Well, you did a great job, like compliment people in the moment. Why was it a great job? How did it benefit the practice? How did it benefit you? How did it benefit other veterinarians or other staff? Then you start getting this culture of positivity where people want to have conversations, because it's not a conversation every time where it's just like, oh God, what did I do wrong now?
Yeah.
Which ends up happening. And I think we sort of have caught ourselves, and we recommend people like almost like for every correction, you need 4 to 5 positives. And I think that helps. As simple as we had an example of one of our vets would come in the morning, and it's a busy day, or you're thinking of the day ahead of you, and they would come in very brusque, and it wasn't a good morning. It was like, all right, we got to hit the road, and we got blah 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 blah, and everybody was like, geez, like don't stay clear of this doctor in the morning. As opposed to coming in, good morning, everybody. How you doing? Boy, the driving was terrible with the weather. Is everybody okay? Everybody driving okay? Spending that extra 5 minutes in the morning to just chat with people and take the tension down a little bit. And then you as a practice owner or as a veterinarian or a manager, you're just like, all right, there's that expectation that you're approachable and you can start having conversations.
The Business of Practice podcast is brought to you by CareCredit. CareCredit keeps equine veterinarians at the heart of care by providing horse owners with simple, budget-friendly financing options. By bridging the gap between cost and care, CareCredit supports healthy financial relationships between veterinarians and their clients. It can help them move forward with care a horse needs whenever and wherever it's needed. Well, and, there's also personality types, which, we could have a whole show on different personality types and how
absolutely.
They like and so forth. But that was a huge eye opener to me as a type A personality. When you come in my office, I don't want to talk about the weather and the cats and the kids and whatever else. But everybody doesn't think that way. So If I walk into somebody's office and I think, gosh, they are the same as me and I need to get right to the point, their personality may be that I need to engage with them. I need to make sure that they're good and that they understand that I see them as a person. And then I can get into the point of why I'm in there. That was probably one of the biggest light bulbs in my professional career.
We're all different. And as the good, insightful manager recognizes the differences and tries to accommodate that to make sure everybody feels included. Another thing for great communication, and I just had an example of this morning, is when we have a hierarchical culture where staff is not left or not involved in decision making, that really feeds disengagement, because it's like, well, I tried. Whatever ideas I have, nobody's going to listen to me. Whereas, your vet assistants, your receptionists, your junior associates, they're the ones that are doing things. So always involve your staff in decision making. You may not always use their input, but at least the fact that you're out there soliciting ideas. And so my example from today is, we were having a discussion about sharing trucks amongst veterinarians at one of our locations. And so I went to the vet assistants and I just said, and they're all getting ready for the day. And I just said, can I have 10 minutes of your time, or do we have time? And they're like, yep, okay. I said, here's my challenge, and it really is a balance between, do we want to buy an extra vehicle and the expense with it versus, vets are very particular how their trucks are set up in terms of the medications they carry, what have you. What do you guys think? And you can just see them just like, oh, our opinion's important. And so they gave me opinions and their feedback. And I was like, okay, but do you think the benefit will outweigh the amount we're going to have to spend every month to purchase this vehicle? And they're like, yeah, that's a really good choice. And it sort of made them realize how decisions are made, and they felt included. And I said, great insight. I really appreciate it. And they all just to a T just said, thanks for asking us. We really appreciated having input.
Yeah.
So
that's a great example. So let's say that you've noticed something in your practice. Let's say you're not a huge practice. Maybe you got 2, 3, 4 vets, techs, office staff. How are you going to know that your staff is disengaged if you stop and actually look at it?
Doing the employee engagement survey gives you a quantifiable number. It gives you a rating, and you'll get the feedback. It's anonymous. You get the feedback. But the other ways it's like when you go in as the leader of the practice or manager, and everybody stops talking. When there's a key person who comes to you and says, "Oh, the staff have been talking," so it's sort of like it suggests that you need an intermediary to bring the news to you. When you ask for feedback and people just like, I don't know, whatever, I don't know. I think those are the kind of clues right off the bat that not everybody's that engaged and not everybody feels comfortable giving feedback.
So what would be your first step if you're noticing that all of these things are happening?
Well, if I'm the practice leader, manager, I'm happy, or even a veterinarian. And so I'll give you an example. So there's one-on-one and then there's one-to-many. And so I've had stories within my own practice years ago and working with other practices where a veterinarian, let's say, was not a clear communicator with, let's say, the technician that was with them that day or a receptionist. And one of the things that's so important is to be able to have a conversation with that person. And it could be a technician with other technicians. I'm just using the example of the vet. And one of the things that we try to get away from is triangulation, which is, let's say there's me as I'm the boss, I'm the leader of the practice, and there's vet A and technician. And the technician comes to me and said, I'm really have a hard time working with the vet. I go to the vet and said, I was just talking to your technician and she has a hard time working with you. Well, that's triangulation, because then it's all of a sudden, well, why not? And it's like, then I'm telling stories of the tech's point of view, and she's not there, or he's not there to give examples, and the veterinarian isn't able to give the good feedback. So we always, when we have a discussion, the parties involved are in the room together. I, as the practice owner, leader, manager, I'm the intermediary. And just so I can, in this example of Sally, your technician is really struggling. You're a bit short during calls. I'm just making up an example. And, she doesn't feel very respected and she feels very diminished. And then inevitably the veterinarian or whoever the other person is like, oh my God, I feel terrible, because they're good people. Why wouldn't they feel terrible? Then they can have that conversation with the other person. It's like, can you give me an example of this? When did that last happen? You as the intermediary, myself, I can then go, all right, we've got it over the air. We've got it out. Nobody wants the situation. How do we go forward? And then there's the discussion of like, hey, if this happens ever again, let me know in the moment so I catch myself, because I don't want to be that kind of person. And then everybody has trust that it happens.
Right.
So that's another example. Another one that used to think that venting was okay. You can vent about somebody and you're just blowing steam off. And what we basically have, there's been good research that says that when you vent, it doesn't make you feel better. In fact, it intensifies the negative feelings you have about that person or situation. And so instead of feeling better about it, you're like, it just reinforces why you're so annoyed with them. So we just say, don't vent. If you got a problem, you come to the person. And with that is don't vent down. So, vent to somebody that can help you. If you got a problem, go to your manager, go to somebody that can make a difference and not gossip and just like, let's say you're a bunch of technicians, you're annoyed with a veterinarian. By venting to each other or gossiping and talking to maybe the new technician about how horrible this doctor is, no, go to the management, go to the owners of the practice, bring it up, which means the owners and the managers have to have that culture that they can come and bring it to you and you will listen and you will act upon it.
That's a good point. Because if you don't do that and they bring that to you, then you'll find yourselves missing staff.
Well, that's it, and there's so much research that's out right now, Kim, about, why people are leaving their jobs. And unfortunately, AVMA had a great survey based on AHA data in the fall of 2021 that we know in the human field that physicians and registered nurses are leaving the profession at a high rate. And sadly, veterinarians and LVTs are leaving at an even higher rate. And when you look at research that's being done in the job market in general people will leave because salary is poor. So let's say you're paying everybody that is competitive and salary is not a discussion. The other main reason why people leave is a toxic work environment. And the biggest reason that contributes to a toxic work environment is poor communication. And so really, as a practice owner, retaining the staff we have is a lot easier than having to go and beat the bushes trying to find new staff, because that's really getting hard.
Yeah, it is. And that's a great thing. So is there anything else that we should talk about as far as staff communication goes? Let's leave our listeners with one thing that they could do today to help staff communication.
I would be developing that culture of positivity and appreciation. If you can go in tomorrow and instead of focusing on what people have done wrong or what they could have done better, change your mindset to say, okay, where can I go in and start thanking people or recognizing when they've gone above and beyond? That, I think, more than anything, eases the interpersonal tensions. And all of a sudden, it's like, oh, this person sees me for who I am. They see the value that I bring. Who doesn't want to feel that way? When I've talked to a lot of vets about this, and they're like, what? They're just doing their job. Why should I point out what's good about it? They're just doing their job. I'm like, yeah, okay, let's flip it around. You deal with pets, horses, you do things, and do you never not like getting compliments from clients? And they're like, of course. I'm like, well, you're just doing your job. Why should they compliment you? And all of a sudden it's like, oh, yeah. And it's like, so we all want to feel appreciated. It's human nature. And we don't feel appreciated. We start to withdraw and we resent.
Yeah.
So a little thank you here and there sprinkled throughout the day goes a long way.
Well, that is a perfect way to end this, Dr. Pownall, and we certainly appreciate it. And I'm a big believer in reward, recognize, and celebrate. That's the way I always call it.
Absolutely.
So again, thank you very much for joining us today. And a big thanks to our sponsor, CareCredit, for sponsoring the Business Practice Podcast this year. So invite our listeners to go to equimanagement.com or your favorite podcast network to hear each episode of the Business of Practice. And if you have any questions or suggestions, send an email to me at kbrown, that's the letter K Brown, at equinenetwork.com. The Business of Practice Podcast is a production of the Equine Podcast Network, an entity of the Equine Network, LLC.